to Crime and Court. My name is Heather, and this is my wrongful conviction series, Innocence Lost. This is the series where every Sunday I do a different individual who has been wrongfully accused or wrongfully convicted of a crime that they did not commit, and that is exactly what we're going to be doing today. Our topic today, as you can see from the thumbnail, is Lewis Matthews. And I have a hashtag there, Justice for Lewis Matthews. Let's get that going. Let's share this. Let's get that hashtag out there because we want people to know his story. And it's going to frighten you when we get into it. So he was actually wrongly accused of taking the life of his friend. And it's a very unnerving story, to say the least. There's very little evidence that he did anything. In fact, there's evidence that he had an alibi. And we are going to be talking about Massachusetts again. It seems like there's a lot of corruption going on there. I mean, it's not like all the corruption is isolated to Massachusetts, but this is it's starting to shine a light. The Karen Reed case has really shown a light on what's been going on there. And I would like to give a special thank you to Bex, who is the cousin of Lewis Matthews, who introduced me to the story, gave me some information, some links, and I'm going to share that all with you today. And we're going to get to it. So I actually went and did some independent research on this case, and I found this news article from the Mashpee Enterprise. So Mashpee, this is a local paper. I don't know if it's electronic or what now, but it Mashpee Enterprise is local. And this is titled Arguments for, let me shrink myself, so sorry. Arguments for Innocence, was the wrong person convicted in the taking of the life of Scott Turner? And this was written by Jessica Hill. I want to point out that it was written in 2019. I couldn't find a really well written, in depth article that had all the information that I wanted to give you about the case that was any closer in time to now, to the present. So, this article, I think, gives a really, really good roundabout. um, they did a deep dive into it, so I'll say that. They did a really good investigative journalistic approach on this, and that's why I'm reading this to you. There may be some things within the case that might have changed, or it might be referring to like hearings that they're supposed to be going to, but at this point, just know that that was back in time, and I'll kind of get you caught up to where we are now after we get through the story. So sorry for that long explanation, but here we go. And thank you again, Bex, and to the family of Lewis Matthews. My heart goes out to you, and I really hope that I do your family member justice here. So let's get started. Please hit that like button, and away we go. So, in the early morning of June 23rd, 2004, an elderly woman was found with her life lost. I'm sorry, an elderly woman found the body of a man whose life was lost. I'm sorry, I really did read this before. I'm just trying to reword the words like that and the M word you're not supposed to say on YouTube for whatever stupid reason we're censored. But anyways, so in the early morning of June 23rd, 2004, an elderly woman found the body of a man in the yard of her house on Ninnegrat Avenue in Mashpee. So his pockets are pulled out, his shoelaces were tied together, and his head had been badly beaten. Police investigated soon after they took Lewis H. Matthews of Mashpee into custody, charging him with the taking of the man's life, Scott D. Turner of Buzzards Bay. So our victim is Scott D. Turner. He was the one whose body was found on this elderly woman's lawn. and his laces tied, pockets pulled out, and he was beaten. So here are our facts. After a 5-day trial, a Barnstable Superior Court jury found Mr. Matthews guilty on December 2nd, 2005 for first-degree homicide in a manner of extreme atrocity or cruelty that took Scott's life. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So a five a 5-day trial, and just like that, somebody, a jury can just convict without knowing all the evidence, and someone can be sentenced for to life in prison without the possibility of parole, mind you. All right, so Mr. Matthews, who is now 52, and his family say that he did not commit the crime in the 14 years since his conviction. Well, that was, it's been 20 now. So in the 20 years since the conviction, they have continued to argue for his innocence. Now, a possible door is opening in their quest to reverse his conviction. A hearing is scheduled at Barnstable Superior Court on a motion for a new trial. The hearing had been set for Monday, but was postponed, blah, blah, blah. Okay, new witnesses are coming forward, and the Committee for Public Counsel Services Innocence Program has recently agreed to look at the case. Further, with a newly hired private investigator, Mr. Matthews' family feels this could be the beginning of the end. Quote, "We all know that he didn't do it. Not only that, there's no physical evidence that ties him to the crime," according to one of Matthews' cousins, Lynn R. Raymond, she says. All right, so Mr. Turner's family members could not be reached for comment on Mr. Matthews' efforts to reverse his conviction for this article. Well, when the Cape and Island District Attorney's Office was asked for comment, Assistant District Attorney Tara Millitmore, I have no idea if I'm saying these names right, sent a link to the Supreme Judicial Court's decision affirming Mr. Matthews' original conviction. So they just said, yes, he's guilty. Okay. So Scott Turner, 43, was over 6 feet tall with long blonde hair and a beard. He was said to have had a great smile and a memorable laugh. Mr. Turner was born in Fall River and had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. And I looked for a picture of Scott Turner and I could not find one. So I apologize. I like to give visuals, but I couldn't find one. His family moved to Buzzards Bay in 1976 and he graduated from Bourne High School in 1979. He worked as a landscaper, a mason, and an operator of heavy equipment, and he enjoyed playing the guitar and tinkering with anything that had wheels, according to his obituary. His brother Michael S. Turner described him in court as big-hearted, fun-loving, free-spirited, and adventurous. No wonder Lewis Matthews was friends with him. He sounded like a great person. He had a kind heart and would have helped anybody, according to Michael Turner. On June 22nd, 2004, Scott Turner invited Mr. Matthews to his sister's house on 181 Ninigret Avenue for a cookout. This is where things start to get complicated, so I'm going to try to break it down if it gets complicated because there's a lot of people and places, and I do have a map which I will show you also, which will help. All right, so Scott, the victim, invites the defendant to the house, to his sister's house, sorry, on Ninigret Avenue to have a cookout. Mr. Turner and Mr. Matthews had met a few weeks prior and became friends. Mr. Matthews helped him find a job as a mason when Mr. Turner was released from Plymouth County House of Correction. He had been serving time for operating under the influence of liquor and several other motor vehicle charges. So our um, our defendant here, Mr. Matthews, he actually was helping Scott Turner out, who had just gotten out of prison, it seems, and needed a job. Mr. Matthews was born in Falmouth, right? I have no idea. I think it's Falmouth. Like it almost is, it's pronounced like myth, but it's spelled like mouth. I don't know. You guys have the greatest accent, though. So, however you say it, I love it. All right. So, Mr. Matthews was born in Falmouth, but lived in Mashpee at the time. He and his wife, Shauna M. Matthews, were separated, and he bounced from couch to couch. He worked as a stonemason. So, he was a hard worker, blue collar worker, going and supporting his family. He had a wife, but they were separated at the time. So he didn't have a specific place that he called home at the time. Although only 5 feet 8 inches tall, he had a muscular frame and a fast metabolism, his former wife said. He has dark skin and black curly hair, and this is a picture of Mr. Matthews more recently. So this was, recent to when this article was published. And that is his cousin Lynn. Okay, there's Lynn Raymond, who we heard a quote from. So they are visiting one another. All right, so even though they only knew each other for about 3 weeks, Mr. Matthew and Mr. Turner have become good friends, Ms. Matthews said. So that's not even coming from Mr. Matthews, that's coming from his wife, ex-wife now, um, coming from his wife, saying that they were good friends. They hit it off like they knew each other forever. They had a lot in common, she said. At the cookout in June 2004, the two drank beer and vodka and barbecued throughout the day. Although many people were coming and going all day, by 9:30 p.m. the party had dwindled. So, Scott Turner's sister's house, they've got people coming in and out. There's lots of drinking going on. It's a barbecue, so people just, come in and go as they please. By 9:30, it's the party's died down. Scott Turner's sister, Linda Turner, and her boyfriend, another person we need to remember a name for, two people actually. So Scott Turner's sister, Linda Turner, and then her boyfriend is Wayne Doherty. So they were both living in the house. They headed to bed around 9:30 p.m. and Mr. Matthews and Mr. Turner walked to Dino's restaurant and sports bar on Route 151, about a 10-minute walk from Ms. Turner's house. There, they drank bourbon and beer and seemed to be having a good time, according to the court transcript. Mr. Matthews paid for the tab, and at around midnight, they left Dino's and walked back to Ms. Turner's house. Here's a picture of Ms. Turner's house. All right, so along the way, they got into a heated discussion. So along the way of their route, a witness reported seeing a small African American man and a taller Caucasian man with a ponytail bickering along Ninigret Avenue at about 1 a.m., according to court transcripts. Back at the house, Mr. Matthews was agitated and excited when they came back, according to a report. He opened the door to Ms. Turner's room 3 times and shouted, "I need your help, and I'm going to K your brother," according to court transcripts. Around 4 a.m., Ms. Turner woke up to use the bathroom and saw Matthews sitting on an ottoman. She asked him where her brother was, and he said that Mr. Turner must have, quote, gotten lucky and that he left with, quote, 2 Jamaicans and some girl. She woke up again at 6 a.m. and saw Mr. Matthews sitting in a recliner in the living room. He muttered, got to go," according to the case file. Mr. Turner's body was found at 6:40 a.m. in the backyard. The backyard. That's interesting. Of 152 Ninigret Avenue, about 6 houses down and across the street from Ms. Turner's house. So here is an image that I took off of Google Maps. This right here, where my mouse is circling at the very top, is 181 Ninigret Avenue. Oh, yeah, let's zoom in. Ah, perfect. Okay, so 181 Ninigret Avenue. So this is where Lynn Turner and her boyfriend, Wayne Doherty, live. And this is where the barbecue was. So apparently, Scott Turner and Lewis Matthews left after the party died down to go get some pizza at this or to go continue drinking and probably get some food at Dino's or Dino's. So this is the walk. It says it's about a 14-minute walk. You could probably do it in 10 if you're a fast walker, I'm sure. And then so Dino's is right here. Dino's Pizza and Sports Bar. So then they walk back. Some argument ensues, but what happens after that is questionable. But this right here, where the red tag is, whatever that's called, the flag, that is 152 Ninigret Avenue, which is the house in which the victim's body was found in the backyard. Apparently, the backyard, which I didn't catch the first time I read that. That's even more like, what? Why is he in the backyard? All right, so a 96-year-old woman at 152 Ninigret Avenue who came across the body looked outside at 5 a.m. and did not see anything unusual. But when she walked outside to get the newspaper around 6 a.m., she saw the body as well as her wheelbarrow, which was not there before, according to court transcripts, which makes me think somebody wheeled him into the yard, um, or was trying to use the wheelbarrow to move him and realized like, hey, this is too difficult. I don't know, but it's odd. And where did the wheelbarrow come from? If I mean, maybe she had it like tucked away somewhere in her backyard, or I don't know, but it was out, so it was not where she had left it, apparently. A man delivering newspapers between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. did not see the body or anything unusual, according to the court transcript. A police officer who responded that morning to the scene observed that Mr. Turner had suffered facial and head trauma, very much like Officer John O'Keefe. Very strange how that happens. Um, in yeah, so injuries were probably similar to what was seen with John O'Keefe, minus the dog bites and potentially the gash in the back of the head. So, spatter evidence suggested that he was struck with a club like instrument multiple times. So, he might have had a large laceration on the back of his head. All right, so stains indicated that he had been dragged from an area around 181 Ninigret Avenue, the house where Ms. Turner lived. His pockets were turned out, his pants were pulled down, and his boots were tied together. So he did make it home, likely, because they're saying that the stains show drag marks from 181. Let's look at the map again. 181's here. You have to go down like several homes to get there, don't you think? And why her wheelbarrow out? It's just very odd. All right, so his pants were pulled down and his boots were tied together. Remember that. His pockets turned out. Um, this is the home of which his body was found. This is 152 Ninigret Avenue. All right, so Mr. Turner suffered multiple jaw, nose, temporal bone, and lower skull fractures. Interesting, according to court transcripts. He lost his life from blunt force trauma to the head and face that resulted in brain bruising, swelling, and hemorrhaging. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy estimated that Mr. Turner suffered at least 10 blows to the head and face. 8 days later, a 30-inch branch was found in the woods near 181 Ninigret Avenue with dried BLOOD and hair on it. DNA testing revealed that it matched Mr. Turner. The medical examiner also found alcohol and the white powder snuff stuff that you sniff in the victim's toxicology report. So he had been clearly drinking all day, and he also had other illegal substances in his body at this time. On the morning that Mr. Turner's body was discovered, Mr. Matthews asked for a ride from Ms. Turner's boss, who had come to pick her up for work about 7 a.m. Ms. Turner and her boss noticed he had dried blood on his face, which appeared to have dripped from an open scab on the bridge of his nose, according to a case file. As they drove by excuse me, as they drove by the crime scene, as it was being processed a few houses down, Mr. Matthews shielded his face after taking a quick look at the scene, according to an officer at the scene who noticed his behavior and jotted down the vehicle's registration. Because he looked and looked away. That makes him guilty? Don't most people want to look and look away from bad things? While in the car, Mr. Matthews said, "My back is killing me," according to witness testimony in the court transcripts. Mr. Matthews was dropped off at his wife's house in Mashpee Village. He sat in the living room and fell asleep, according to a testimony from his wife's roommate. Later, he went into the bathroom and began to rinse the shorts that he was wearing in the bathtub. His wife's roommate noted that he seemed tired. Oh, well, he's tired. He must be guilty, right? Mr. Matthews told her that he did not feel good and he wanted to go to the hospital. According to the roommate's testimony, he said his chest hurt and he thought he had a lung infection. All clear signs of guilt, right? And I'm being sarcastic if you couldn't tell. Mr. Doherty, Ms. Turner's boyfriend, so this is the boyfriend, Wayne Doherty, was on his way to work when he noticed the crime scene and identified the body as Mr. Turner. Mr. Doherty was wearing a white t-shirt that had two small red spots on it, and the police asked if they could have the shirt for testing, to which he complied. The blood was later identified to match the DNA under Scott Turner's fingernails. So the boyfriend had stains on his shirt. He was the one that was like, oh yeah, he inserted himself into the crime scene and decided that he was going to identify the body. Probably, maybe this could be like a guilt, um, or it could be their own guilt or a way to try to stay in front of the law enforcement. Sometimes perpetrators do that. They insert themselves into the investigation somehow. And by doing so, he made himself a suspect because he had stains on his shirt that actually matched the DNA under Scott's fingernail. So it wasn't Scott's DNA, but it was DNA under his fingernails, which is weird. So maybe the perpetrator's BLOOD could be on him if there were two people involved. All right, so later that same morning, Mr. Matthews was taken into custody in the Mashpee Police Department on unrelated charges from more than a year before. Why take him in now just because, like, it's been a year, so why come now? They want to get him on something so they can later go back and pin the uh, loss of Scott Turner's life on him. That's what they're trying to do here. Like, oh, well, you have priors on something. We're going to take you in for that. And then we're going to hold you long enough so that we can make some other charges stick. And because the legal system moves very, very slowly, you're going to be sitting in prison for a long time before anybody even remembers who you are. That's a lot of what corrupt law enforcement will do. I'm not saying that happened here, but I'm just saying. All right, so later that same morning, he was taken into custody on these other unrelated charges. On July 7th, 2003, a case was filed in Edgartown District Court. Mr. Matthews was charged with operating under the influence of liquor and negligent operation of a motor vehicle, according to a warrant report obtained from Falmouth District Court. And that is totally unrelated to the crime that they're investigating now. So, why? Just why? All right, so Mr. Matthews would admit to hanging out with the wrong crowd. Ms. Raymond, his cousin, said he was not in a good place at the time of this crime. Well, he was separated from his wife. He was going, it said, from couch to couch. So, yeah, he might have, not been feeling great about how things had been going lately. I wouldn't either. Mr. Matthews was on a downward spiral. Ms. Matthews, his former wife, said he drank a lot, sometimes a case of beer a day, and joked that his two best friends were Bud and Jack. And this is a picture of the Mass State Police Crime Scene Services doing whatever it is they do. It's not really investigating crimes, it's more like pinning crimes on people. All right, but Ms. Matthews does not doubt her husband's innocence. So remember that. They had problems. She may not be his favorite advocate right now at the moment because they were separated, but she's still advocating for him. That's the point. She still believes that her husband is innocent, or ex-husband now. I'm not sure. Even if he was intoxicated at the time and was suffering from alcoholism. I've seen him drunk on more than a couple of occasions, and there's no way, Ms. Matthews said. So even when he's in an intoxicated state, which she has seen, she's saying there's no way he could have done the crime that they're accusing him of doing. Bringing him in on a warrant for the OUI offense in Edgartown, Mashpee police officers confiscated Mr. Matthews' sneakers and chained him to a bunk in the station for about 45 minutes. That's when I knew something pretty serious was going on, Mr. Matthews said in a phone interview. Nobody gets handcuffed to a bunk. While Mr. Matthews was in custody on the OUI warrant, Mass State Police Trooper Richard Cosgrove and Mashpee Police Detective Robert R. Waterfield questioned him about the homicide. Mr. Matthews agreed to speak with the investigators. And that's unfortunate that he spoke because they will take anything that he said and turn it around against him. Not can and will, it absolutely will be turned around and used against you in some form or fashion. So my advice is don't talk to the police ever unless you have an attorney with you. And even then, I'd be scared to say anything. All right, so sorry, I read that line. All right, so he told them that he and Mr. Scott left the bar separately. He said he returned to Ninigret Avenue at about 11:30 p.m. and he fell asleep watching TV. He also said that Mr. Turner came back to the house later and asked him for money, which Mr. Matthews refused to give. Mr. Turner became angry and shoved him in the back, he said. He said that Mr. Turner then left as a passenger in an automobile and said it might have been with a girl from Dino's, according to the court transcript. So they leave the bar separately, and Lewis Matthews goes back to Lynn Turner's home. He falls asleep. Shortly thereafter, the victim comes into the home and asks Matthews for money. He says no. They get into Turner shoves him apparently and gets mad. And then he leaves with some girls or a girl at least that might have been from Dino's. He made no mention of any Jamaicans during the interview. Mr. Matthews admitted to the investigators that he yelled to Ms. Turner about wanting to K her brother because he was probably angry with him because he was probably coming in hot, wanting money, and maybe he was doing some nefarious things with that money because he had the white stuff in his system. Witnesses saw Mr. Matthews and Mr. Turner leave the bar together, which contradicted Mr. Matthews' statement that he left separately, the prosecutor argued at trial. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that the prosecutor's right. Just because there were people seeing an African American man with a tall white man with long blonde hair doesn't mean that it was Matthews still. Because who else was, I mean, he was obviously hanging out with other people that night too. He was leaving in cars with additional people. Who was he with that night besides Matthews, after Matthews? Who, police investigate that? No. Detective Cosgrove saw tire marks in the driveway according to court transcripts. But Mrs. Turner, Scott's sister, did not hear a car pull up in the middle of the night. Well, just because she didn't hear it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. These are some state troopers investigating. That is Police Lieutenant Michael Sexton and Kate Squires, a state trooper. All right, so during the interview at the police department, Mr. Matthews at first said that he had not showered and then said he got in the shower with his clothes on. He also mentioned in the interview that he might have wrestled with Mr. Turner. So they're trying to point out that there were some inconsistencies in Matthews' statements. Detective Waterfield testified that they told Mr. Matthews that they knew something had happened between Mr. Matthews and Mr. Turner the night before, and that Mr. Matthews responded by invoking his right to silence, saying he needed to talk to a lawyer. So what? If a detective was telling me, we know you know something, we know there's something that happened between the two of you, yeah, I wouldn't speak either because that's your right to remain silent so they don't turn your words against you. Even if you are completely and 100% innocent, you still have a right to be silent. So what point are they making here? Am I saying he invoked his right to silence, so therefore he wouldn't answer my question, so he's guilty? Get out of here, Detective Waterfield. Trooper Crossgrove and Detective Waterfield concluded that Matthews was the last person to be seen with the victim, making him the prime suspect. I want to point out, and I didn't at the time, so now I'm going to scroll back up, that really jumped to the gun with, they really jumped the gun with narrowing in on Mr. Matthews. They didn't do any investigative work. I'm trying to find where it was that they took him in. Sorry, I should have pointed it out sooner. It was like later that night, wasn't it? I can't remember. Sorry. Yeah, that same morning, later that same morning, Mr. Matthews was taken into custody. So, and on the unrelated charges, but like I said, they took him in on custody so that they could make this other crime stick, is my personal opinion. I can't prove it, but that's what I think. So where was I? We were past that picture. All right, so they made him the prime suspect. He was the last person to see him. Mr. Waterfield, who has since retired, said in a phone interview that there seemed to be enough physical evidence to tie Mr. Matthews and Mr. Turner together. How do you know that? Hold on. Wait, what? Physical evidence? You haven't done any investigative work. You put Matthews away, take him in for charges unrelated to this, and you're going to tell me within hours of the investigation you had physical evidence to tie them together? You hadn't, that's not enough time to do any kind of stuff in the lab, let alone collect your evidence and take it to a lab. What physical evidence do they have? Oh, this makes me so angry. All right, so the fact that they were both intoxicated and that they knew each other and were seen drinking together at the bar was enough to tie the two. he said. That is horse crap. Because they were intoxicated, seen together, that's enough. That's enough to tie him together. He did it because they were out that night together. There was a party. People were in and out of that house. And as we know, there were illegal substances being had, which could also skew someone's, ability between right and wrong or being able to trust somebody. Maybe Mr. Turner met someone that he didn't know very well and, got himself into a sticky situation without um without Matthews even being involved because Matthews could be home in blah, 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 blah. I feel like I'm stumbling over my words. Matthews could be in this house and Turner could be out doing God knows what, speaking to how many people, but the police never investigated it. They can't disprove it that somebody else did it. So this is what drives me crazy. When you don't do a thorough investigation, you can't say definitively that this is our guy because you didn't investigate the 10 other suspects that could have been there that night. Let me breathe because it's starting to get worked up. Because the case is still active, Trooper Cosgrove could not comment for this article. Investigators also found the presence of trace amounts of BLOOD in many places where Mr. Matthews sat, such as the recliner and the ottoman in Ms. Turner's house, as well as the floor of her boss's truck, the bathtub, shower curtain, and bathroom carpet, as well as at his wife's house on 28 Wampanoag Drive? Wampanoag? You guys from Boston, from the Massachusetts area, let me know because that's a word I've never seen before. Or so they found the bathtub, the shower curtain, the bathroom carpet at his wife's house also tested positive for trace amounts of BLOOD, as well as the shorts that he had been wearing that night. A swab of his right hand also tested positive for the presence of BLOOD. But great, he had the presence of it. But whose was it? You're not giving me a definitive answer of whose it was, and you can't prove that it was Turner's. I'm sure, in my bathroom I have BLOOD that isn't washed because that's where I go and take care of my wounds. You know what I'm saying? Or not washed, but like if you did a luminol or whatever, you could probably find because that's where a lot of people go to wash their wounds. And if he had a wound, a cut that was open, that was bleeding, a scab that he had recut, then it's very likely that he could have got something on his clothes, trace amounts, and then it got all over where he was sitting. Police charged Matthews police charged Matthews with Mr. Turner's, the loss of his life. So after 17 months later, Mr. Matthews was found guilty on December 2nd, 2005, after a 5-day jury trial for first-degree homicide in a manner of extreme atrocity or cruelty. Well, what was the manner? We don't even know what happened to him. What are the police saying happened to him? He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And just like that, someone can be wrongfully convicted and spend the rest of their life in prison and no one ever clears or exonerates them because the system is so slanted and so cruel to anyone that's in the system, you can't get out. Like it's so hard to appeal. It's so hard to have a, a new trial or a hearing to hear new evidence. And that is kind of where we're at here is that they're trying to get a new trial so that the right evidence can be shown. All right. So ever since his conviction, he and his family have continued to fight for his innocence. Ms. Raymond, Mr. Matthews' cousin, has taken on searching his case. She has created a website called Justice for Louis Matthews to draw attention to her cousin's story. As Mr. Matthews' former wife stated or started the Facebook group In Prison and Innocent, a support group for the other people whose family members are believed to be incarcerated unjustly. And this is a picture of Lewis Matthews and his son, I believe. Yes, his son, visiting him in June of 1990. Of 1990. No, of 2019. They were visiting. I don't know where I got 90s. All right, so Mr. Matthews sent his wife the divorce papers when he was first convicted, telling her to move on with her life. But they plan on being together again when or if he is freed, she said, and she still calls herself his wife. So they are still considered married, I guess. They have not separated and officially or divorced officially and plan on reuniting if he is ever, let's say, when he is exonerated of this crime and released. We're going to be positive and say when he is exonerated. After years of research, Mr. Matthews and his family do not believe enough evidence ties him to the crime, and they have unanswered questions, as do I. And as Mr. Matthews is African American, his family believes race also played a role in his conviction. I'm sure it did. In the trial, according to the court transcript, the prosecution used inconclusive DNA tests against Mr. Matthews, meaning that there was not enough DNA information to determine if the defendant or the victim's profiles could be included or excluded. Samples taken from Mr. Matthews' shorts were inconclusive when compared to Scott's DNA. So all that BLOOD that we said was all over the place, we can't definitively tie it to the victim. Swabs taken from Mr. Matthews' hands, fingers, and fingernails revealed a mixture of DNA from at least two sources, with Mr. Matthews himself being the main contributor. So there was another individual, perhaps, that Mr. Turner encountered throughout the day where he was near him enough that somehow DNA got under his fingernails. And he was with Mr. Matthews all day. So it's not a surprise that Mr. Matthews' DNA would be on him if they were hanging out and spending time together the entire day. Just talking here, my DNA is going everywhere in this room. So just being in the presence of someone else, you can get their DNA on you. Or someone else's DNA that they encountered can get on you. And you never met that person. So it's very scary how DNA can just be on places that it doesn't mean just because you're let me back up that thought. Just because your DNA is somewhere doesn't make you guilty. Let's just because your DNA might be found somewhere does not prove guilt. Honestly, and people think it does. People have this impression that, oh, DNA, okay. They hear the word DNA and they're like, oh, okay, that's a match. Great. This guy's guilty. And they don't think twice about convicting that person. They don't understand the nuances of DNA testing, the many factors that can go wrong throughout DNA testing, and the fact that, oh, about 99% of the population have about 90% or whatever it is. I don't even know what it is, but there's like 99% of like all the same DNA. It's that like 1% that varies. I'm sure I have my percentages wrong, so don't quote me on that, but it's a very small percentage of what is different in your DNA that can identify you from Joe Schmo. But everybody else has very similar DNA up until that point where you break it down to like that tiny little bit that's different. So to me, it's just hearing the word DNA doesn't count for anything for me. And I don't trust laboratories from state police and, law enforcement because they're going to want to try to influence results as well. So if anyone takes anything away from this stream, one, don't talk to police without an attorney present. And two, DNA is not the smoking gun that everybody thinks it is. DNA is just what it is. DNA gets everywhere. You go out in public and your DNA can be on a doorknob, and somebody else throughout the day can go touch that doorknob and then go commit a crime, and your DNA is now at that scene. So just think about that. DNA is not a smoking gun, like the prosecution would have you believe. Okay, I've said my PSA. Sorry. The second source did not contain enough DNA to make a conclusion. So there's two sources under Scott's fingernails. Mr. Matthews is one, and then there's a second one that they find inconclusive, not enough DNA. So it could not be determined whether the DNA profile matched Scott, even. So they weren't sure if it was Scott's DNA either. Likewise, swabs taken from Mr. Turner's fingernails showed a mixture of DNA from at least three people, the major source being Mr. Turner himself. The two other profiles in the mixture were inconclusive to Mr. Matthews. According to the Supreme Judicial Court, however, the prosecution is allowed to submit inconclusive test results. Let me read that again. According to the Supreme Judicial Court, the prosecution is allowed to submit inconclusive test results when the defendant calls into question the adequacy of the police investigation. So when you start to question the integrity of the police investigation, they can submit inconclusive evidence, inconclusive test results from DNA into the trial. How bogus is that? Do you guys not see how broken our system is? It's people say it's the greatest system in the world, and maybe so, but there are so many flaws to it and so many things that we need to change in order to make it the best system. They, of course, it's going to have flaws. You can't be 100% accurate on all these things, but we need to do better. All right, so the DNA chemist stated in a testimony that 21 out of 34 items collected from the investigation were tested and that the results of those tested were inconclusive. The other 7 items were not tested. Mr. Matthews' attorney argued that the BLOOD evidence not introduced could have been exculpatory and could have exonerated the defendant according to court transcripts. Well, yeah, absolutely it could, as well as the defendant's summary of their oral argument. But the problem is, again, jurors don't understand that DNA is not the smoking gun that everybody thinks it is. The defense has also argued that the blood that was present on Mr. Matthews and on the areas that he sat was his own. The weekend before Mr. Turner's life was taken, Mr. Matthews fell into a fire pit and got a gash across the bridge of his nose. Witnesses noticed dried blood on his face that appeared to come from a reopened scab on his nose. Although the BLOOD was found on the places that he sat and in his wife's bathroom, it was not found on Mr. Turner or on the scene, according to Matthews' defense. So you're trying to say that Matthews did it, but there's no evidence of his DNA at the scene or on Mr. Turner. And he's supposedly actively um, leaking that BLOOD, according to people, that he reopened it, yet it wasn't found on Mr. Matthews. On Mr. Turner, on the victim. It's not adding up, people. Some of the samples taken from Ms. Matthews' bathroom excluded Mr. Turner's DNA, according to the DNA report, which was not brought up at the trial. So Turner's DNA was not found in Ms. Matthews' bathroom. And that didn't get told at trial. That's a big problem. Defense has also submitted motions requesting information to the whereabouts of pieces of evidence such as a t-shirt that was found at the scene but has been misplaced and was never tested. Is that Doherty's t-shirt or a different t-shirt? Defense has also submitted motions requesting information about the whereabouts of evidence such as a t-shirt that was found at the scene but has been misplaced. Maybe it was Scott Turner's t-shirt that they misplaced. It doesn't really say. When Mr. Matthews first appealed his case, an incorrect transcript was sent to the Supreme Judicial Court. The court reporter mistyped the DNA results and wrote inclusive instead of the word inconclusive, which is a huge difference. Changes the meaning of the word completely. It is the opposite of the word that was said. Before it could be fixed, the Supreme Judicial Court denied Mr. Matthews' motion for a new trial and affirmed his original conviction, according to Ms. Raymond. The crime log on Massachusetts courts, their website, shows that court transcripts were sent to the Supreme Judicial Court on March 24th, 2006. By October 2006, his appeal was denied. Defense requested audio recordings to be sent on May 29th, 2008, and updated trial transcripts were sent to the Supreme Judicial Court on June 26, 2008. According to the trial, Mr. Matthews' attorney argued that Mr. Matthews was immediately targeted as a prime suspect, and I agree. Like he was taken in that same morning for totally unrelated charges just to get him incarcerated so that they could get the other charges to stick. For instance, the bathroom in Ms. Turner's house was not swabbed or tested for evidence, while Ms. Matthews' bathroom was. So Ms. Turner, did I say Ms. Turner? Ms. Turner's house. Ms. Turner's house was not swabbed, yet Ms. Matthews' bathroom was. So take that what you will. His wife's bathroom was swabbed, but yet the sister of Scott Turner, where Scott Turner had come back that night, that house wasn't swabbed. There were so many bits of evidence and pieces, none of which connect him. And it's the house that he was supposed to have been dragged from, and they didn't swab the house. They didn't go into the house. Like in Karen Reed, they didn't go into the house. You didn't search the house, buddy. That's where your evidence could have possibly been. I'm not saying that it would have been found, but maybe something happened between Scott Turner and Wayne Doherty and Lynn, his sister. Maybe there was an argument that ensued there because he wanted money and he wasn't getting it from Matthews. I'm not saying that they did something. I'm just saying it's a possibility. Nobody ever went and looked. Nobody ever questioned Doherty and Ms. Matthews. It's shameful police work. It's shameful. They took classes straight out of Michael Proctor's book, I'm sure. These people, these investigators need to be investigated themselves. All right, so there were so many bits of evidence and pieces, none of which connected him, said Drew Segadelli, Mr. Matthews' lawyer, during closing arguments. Scott Turner didn't lose his life at this man's hands, and there is no evidence that says he did. And wait, what? Let me try that again. I'm trying to reword it so YouTube doesn't hate me. I'll just say this: Scott Turner didn't at this man's hands, and there is no evidence that says he does and that he did. Okay. That is a quote from Drew Segadelli, Mr. Matthews' lawyer, during closing arguments. Defense argued Mr. Matthews had no reason to take Mr. Turner's life. They were friends. Witnesses testified that Mr. Matthews and Mr. Turner became good friends. Mr. Matthews and Mr. Turner met through his sister, Linda Turner, who was dating Mr. Matthews off and on again. There it is. What? Ms. Turner and Mr. Matthews dated on again, off again. How do you think Wayne Doherty felt about this guy being around his girl? Let's see. Mr. Matthews helped Mr. Turner find a job after Mr. Turner got out of jail, and they spent a lot of time together. During the trial, the defense made several arguments proposing other possible suspects and argued that the testimony of some witnesses was not credible. Ms. Turner's statement pins Mr. Matthews in her house at 4 a.m. Ms. Turner, Scott's sisters says that Mr. Matthew was in her house at 4 a.m., although the body was not found until 6. So there's that. And the witness had looked out the window at 5 and didn't see anything. So we know that the body must have gotten there between 5 and 6. Mr. Matthews was at her house at 4. In the closing statement at trial, defense counsel suggested that Ms. Turner and Mr. Doherty may have concealed evidence the morning the body was discovered, only to later rediscover that evidence. That's a good point. Mr. Turner and Mr. Doherty may have concealed evidence at the time, only to bring it out later. Either the police investigation is woeful, or something's going on with Wayne and Linda. And I question that too. That's according to the closing argument from Mr. Segadelli. Counsel also stated that the Commonwealth case relied almost entirely on circumstantial evidence shaped largely by two people who may have been involved. What does that sound like? Jen McCabe feeding all the information to the law enforcement. It's crazy. This is crazy. There's so many similarities to the Karen Reed case. After the body was discovered, investigators searched the area and used canines to find any evidence, but the weapon was not located. Not until 8 days later was the weapon found, when Linda Turner and Wayne Doherty told the investigators that they found additional BLOOD evidence in their home. When the investigators arrived, they found the branch used as the murder weapon in bushes only 50 feet from the house. So that branch that had Scott's DNA on it was only 50 feet from the home, but it wasn't discovered until 8 days later. 1 second. So that is what the investigators are saying, or I'm sorry, that's what the attorneys are saying. The defense attorneys are saying that this branch that they found 50 feet from the house, like maybe they knew where it was all along. They hid it for the investigation, but then they found it later to be like the heroes and say, oh, look, here we found this. I don't know. Mr. Turner and Mr. Doherty also called police 2 weeks after the homicide and said that they discovered a black button-down shirt stuffed into a lazy boy recliner where Mr. Matthews had been sitting the morning the body was discovered. What? Do you think maybe they might be trying to set him up? Miss Turner used to date him. Mr. Doherty might want to get this guy out of their lives. On the morning of the homicide, however, investigators had searched the recliner and did not find the shirt. So where did that shirt come in at? When? When did that shirt come in? That's the question. Ms. Turner said that the shirt was in Mr. Turner's possession the night of the crime. Defense counsel for Mr. Matthews further stressed that Mr. Doherty's t-shirt, which he was wearing when he identified the body of Mr. Turner, had two small splotches, one of which was a potential contributor to the DNA found under Mr. Turner's fingernails. Defense also argued that they were not made aware that the t-shirt was subjected to DNA analysis. Defense didn't know that? The defense attorneys weren't informed that that happened or what the results were? That should have caused a mistrial, or could have. I wonder if, I guess they can't at this point appeal for that particular reason, but it kind of is related with the whole DNA testing that they want to appeal now and get a new trial. So in July 2018, however, Cape and Island District Attorney Michael O'Keefe, which is another strange coincidence to Officer John O'Keefe, so weird. The similarities in this case. In July 2018, Cape and Islands District Attorney Michael O'Keefe, in response to the defendant's summary of argument on the motion for a new trial, said that the Commonwealth informed the defendant that it was seeking additional testing prior to the trial. There is nothing of substance raised in the defendant's motion for a new trial, Mr. O'Keefe wrote. A majority of the claims have been previously addressed. Although the defense raised awareness of two witnesses' connections at the original trial, another suspect is possible, but it was never discussed at the original trial. Defense brought it up in a summary of defendant's oral arguments in July 2018, 39 days after Mr. Turner's life was lost. Another homicide occurred. The body of a woman named Lisa Ann Brundage was found at a temporary campsite off Martin Road in Falmouth near the Mashpee town line. According to the state medical examiner's office, Ms. Brundage lost her life due to blunt force trauma and the same cause as Mr. Turner. Thomas K. Winter, her boyfriend, went into the Mashpee Police Department and told officers that he might have ended his girlfriend's life. He was charged with voluntary manslaughter in the beating of his girlfriend and sentenced to 15 to 18 years in Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction in 2006. What if this guy has some kind of connection? What if he was just walking down the street and he saw Mr. Turner and he was like, just got into it with some guy? Who knows? Mr. Winner, Mr. Thomas K. Winner, it's a weird name. Had 4 previous charges of assault and battery in 1998 and 2000. Ms. Brundage, the woman whose body was found off Martin Road, was dating both Mr. Turner, the victim of the Ninigret murder, and Mr. Winner at the time. There's a huge connection there, and that is a huge reason why this should have never gone to trial, or should have at least been investigated much, much better, because there's ties to this particular homicide. Now, like I said, if you could tie Winner to Turner, you can say maybe something there, because Turner was dating his girlfriend. Now we know that. But okay, so at the time, Mr. Turner was wearing a ring that Ms. Brundage had given him. But information about the affair was not presented at the trial of Mr. Matthews, which is so ridiculous. Why do they not get to know? It's so dumb that we're asking jurors to make a decision, a huge decision, based on whether someone's freedoms are taken away or not, or even their life taken away in some instances. Yet we're withholding a ton of information from them. And this is what drives me crazy when judges don't let stuff in. And it makes it mind-boggling to me. How are you supposed to make an educated decision when information doesn't come in at trial? Anyways, Mr. Matthew, so this it didn't come in at trial, as Mr. Winter invoked his Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate himself. So because this witness didn't want to speak and incriminate himself more, Mr. Matthews doesn't get a fair trial. In June of 2004, Mr. Winter and Ms. Brundage were living next door to 181 Ninigret Avenue, where Linda Turner lived. As he learned that Mr. Turner and Ms. Oh, so Mr. Winter was living next door? Are you freaking kidding me, people? Why is this so complicated? There are so many suspects. How can you have taken Lewis Matthews in within hours and say it's it? He did it. All right. So Mr. Winter and Ms. Brundage were living right next door to 181 Linda Turner's house. After he learned that Mr. Turner and Ms. Brundage were having an affair, Mr. Winter allegedly told Linda Turner and other witnesses that he would K both of them, according to the 2018 summary of defendant's oral arguments. Another witness at the Matthews murder trial, William J. Bonito, also invoked his Fifth Amendment at the trial. These witnesses not wanting to talk because they could incriminate themselves, and yet it gives Lewis Matthews an unfair trial. Mr. Bonito worked with Mr. Winter and Mr. Doherty, and he was over at Ms. Turner's house the day of the cookout in June. Scott Turner kicked him out of the house the night before he lost his life, according to court transcripts. Although he was questioned by police as part of the initial investigation, DNA evidence did not connect Mr. Bonito to the crime. Mr. Bonito lost his life in 2012. During Mr. Matthews' trial, no witnesses who could identify third party culpability were brought to the stand, according to Ms. Raymond. And this is what I'm talking about. Why are these witnesses not able, like, why can't we identify third party culpability in this country without jumping through hoops? And then, even then, like, you ask the judge, can you do it? And they say no. It's ridiculous. If you have evidence that points to a third party, you should be able to present it at trial, no matter what. That is exculpatory evidence that could exonerate someone. And we're choosing to keep that information hidden, which just baffles me. Although no physical evidence ties Mr. Matthews to the crime, Ms. Matthews often asks herself a simpler question: what would she do if she had committed the crime? If you were going to end a man who you were with all night, are you going to walk down the street and hang out at your sister's house for the rest of the night? She asked. She was a good question. No, you probably wouldn't. If you're going to take the life of a man, you're taking off. You're not going to stick around and catch a ride with his sister in the morning. Right. That's not how this works. And if you do, you're going to be covered in the victim's serological fluids. Mr. Matthews and his family have have reached out to the New England Innocence Project since its creation in 2000. New England Innocence Project has helped exonerate 70 people, according to its website. It is so. I know that the Innocence Project now has exonerated more than 200 people, or over 200 people at this time. So that's an old number. The New England Innocence Project, I'm not sure, but I know the Innocence Project out of New York has done like more than 2,000, but they have like locations all over. But the organization said it could not take Mr. Matthews' case because his case is with the Committee for Public Counsel Services, Ms. Raymond said. The Committee for Public Counsel Services is the state's public defender agency and provides defense for those who cannot afford an attorney. So there's a lot of back and forth on what they can do. But Ms. Raymond recently found out that the Committee for Public Counsel Services has its own innocence program, and she reached out. That program has just started looking into Mr. Matthews' case because of complications related to a delay in securing necessary documents. The Innocence Program has not yet officially taken on the case. We all think that we're going to get our fair shake when we go to court, says Ms. Raymond. You think that the justice system works until you're in the situation, and that's what you thought. I'm not guilty of this, so they're going to see that I'm not guilty, and I'm not going to get convicted. That's what he thought. And I bet that's what the whole family thought. Oh yeah, the jurors will see it our way because it's the truth. We've got the truth on our side, but that's not always the case. A lot of times you have crooked prosecutors that'll do a lot just to get a win. And same with law enforcement. They just want that conviction for some reason, or that arrest. Mr. Raymond has no doubt that race played a factor in his sentencing. The jury on Mr. Matthews' trial was all white. How does that happen? You're supposed to have a jury of your peers. Peers means people like you. How? However, when told at the beginning of the trial that the defendant is a black cape, don't know how to say that word, but I think it has something to, I looked this up and now I lost it. Is it, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Let me look it up and see how to pronounce it. So no, Cabo Verde. That's not what I want. Cape. It is a country in Africa. Okay. So Cape Verdeans, I don't know if I'm saying that right, are people who are native to Cape Verde, an island nation in West Africa. So that is um, Lewis Matthews. Um, what is the word I'm looking for? Nationality, right? That's the word I'm looking for, right? Nationality. His um, ancestry. That's the word I'm looking for. He comes from Cape Verdean ancestry, so he's from West West Africa. Is that what I said? I'm sorry if I'm getting this wrong. So he um, and the victim was white. So they knew that this was a black man, a white victim, and all jury members said it would not affect their impartiality, but it may have. Having an all-white jury in and of itself is not illegal, but it certainly raises some questions about the process of how jurors were selected. Yes, I raised questions about that too. Said Roshan D. Hall, the director of the Racial Justice Program of the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. I can say that without a doubt, having an all white jury increases the likelihood that defendants of color, particularly black defendants, will be convicted. I don't doubt that that is very true. Mr. Hall helped develop the ACLU of Massachusetts integrated advocacy approach to address racial justice issues. Before he was with the ACLU, he was the deputy director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice, and he served as the assistant district attorney for Suffolk County, where he prosecuted a bunch of stuff. I'm not going to read all that because I don't think I can say it. But he did prosecute homicide cases. He has become aware of plenty of cases in which people claim their innocence, maintain it, and later have been exonerated. There's been an increase in the number of people being exonerated, Mr. Hall said, and because people of color, and black people in particular, are overrepresented in the system, it's going to follow that they're going to see larger numbers of people of color who are exonerated. The disparity between race and the justice system is well known. Innocent African Americans are about 7 times more likely than innocent whites to be convicted of murder, according to the National Registry of Exonerations, and African American prisoners who are convicted of homicide are about 50% more likely to be innocent than other convicted members, other convicted unalivers. African American prisoners who are convicted of homicide are about 50% more likely to be innocent. Crazy. 50%. Of the 1,900 exonerations listed in the National Registry of Exonerations, 47% are African Americans, according to the statistics as of October 2016. It probably hasn't changed a whole lot in 8 years. Since 1989, Massachusetts has seen 69 exonerations, with 39% of them resulting or relating to homicide. Of those exonerated in Massachusetts, 35% were black and 49% were white, according to the National Registry. Racial disparity in the incarceration system has been ingrained in our history, Mr. Hall said, from slavery through Reconstruction to Jim Crow laws to the current mass incarceration of African Americans. When a crime is committed, it is easier to believe that the suspect is black or a person of color, especially when the story fits into a narrative that already exists about black people and criminality, according to Mr. Hall. The way that racism operates in society, it's not about people using the N word, Mr. Hall says. It's about having a belief, whether it's inherent, expressed, or implicit, a belief in the values of certain lives over others. beliefs of certain cultures over others, beliefs in the criminality of certain bodies over others. I think that is really well said. You're placing something over another. You're placing one person over another. We should all be equal and have the equal presumption of innocence going into a trial. In this country, a lot of people equate being arrested to actually being guilty because they just trust law enforcement implicitly, which I don't understand because if you look at any of the stories about law enforcement, they're all crooked. I'm not saying that there aren't good cops. There are great cops out there. The stories that we hear, the ones that are sensationalized, are the corruption. But we don't hear it often because a lot of the good cops just look the other way because they don't want to turn their back on their brother in blue. So it's a huge problem racially, it's a huge problem with our law enforcement, and something needs to be done. I mean, we need to just do better. This is um, when we start to put one person over another, or we frame one person and let the actual perpetrators go, like in Karen Reed. You can't have that. You can't have a society like that. You're picking and choosing which laws you want to enforce and what people you want to enforce it on. And that's not the way that our society is supposed to be. And that's not the way that our founding fathers of this country envisioned our country to be. Mr. Matthews said that she feels, Ms. Matthews said she feels like the beginning of the end has come and the Matthews family is staying positive as new develops arise. With a recently hired private investigator and new witnesses coming forward, Ms. Raymond said the case is finally moving along. And this was in 2019, and we're still now talking about it. He's still in prison. So even if you think your case is moving along, it could still be slow as molasses. And that means that the person who is wrongfully convicted is still sitting in prison for more and more time passing by, while their loved ones also have more time on the outside passing by and things happening in their lives, and they're stressed out about their loved one being in prison. This needs to stop, what we're doing to our citizens here in Massachusetts, especially. So recently hired private investigator, new witnesses coming forward, the case is moving along. Mr. Matthews is also in the process of requesting potential pieces of evidence, such as photographs taken of footprints near the crime scene before casting was poured into them, and he has also filed an interlocutory appeal, which is an appeal of a ruling by a trial court that is made before the trial itself has concluded. Kind of like an emergency appeal. Mr. Raymond hopes that at the upcoming hearing, again, this is, I don't know what happened necessarily at these hearings, but we know that he's still sitting in prison and still trying to appeal and get new evidence looked at. So where was I? Ms. Ms. Raymond hopes that at the upcoming hearing, the court will make an objective decision based on the withholding of evidence and the suppressing of statements made to the police by potential witnesses. She says, "My hope is that the errors of law will be recognized, that the court will see that they have truly 100% innocent man serving a life sentence." Mr. Matthews, however, is no longer in as much of a hurry to get out of prison, Ms. Matthews said. Ever since his mother had passed in June and he was not able to see her, Mr. Matthews is not rushing his case. And that was what I was talking about when I said time is going by and the people on the outside, their lives are going by. They're aging, they're growing up. Kids are growing up that parents miss out on many opportunities and many experiences to be with those children. And your parents pass away and age and grow, when you're sitting in prison, and it stresses your mom out. So she dies probably earlier than she would have because the stress that an individual goes through thinking like, well, my son is in the wrong place. He's in, he's wrongfully convicted. It happens very, very often where family members of wrongfully convicted individuals have many health problems based on like stress and anxiety and things that they're experiencing because of what they're going through. It's mm, putting someone away for life shouldn't just be like that easy, but it seems in this country, it really does seem like it's super easy to get convicted and it's impossible to get out. Mr. Matthews isn't in a rush. If he has to live there the rest of his life, he's okay with that, according to Ms. Matthews. He is very optimistic. I know he has days where he feels defeated. Just like anybody. Your days are up, your days are down. He spends his time in the library researching his case and plays softball and billiards. Mr. Matthews also became a baptized Jehovah's Witness and takes Bible studies. He started learning Spanish to minister his to s- he started learning Spanish to minister to Spanish speakers. So that's awesome. He's learning Spanish so he can spread goodness and joy and healing to others. Louis also is writing a book about his story, which will be titled My Midlife Sentence, says Miss Matthews. I would love to read that if he ever does publish that. She said that Mr. Matthews has accepted the fact that he is in prison. At first, he was angry, she said. Every day that goes by is a day he doesn't have with his kids and grandkids. He's upset about that. It motivates him to keep going. So that's his motivation, is his family, the people that are also suffering on the outside because they're missing that family member. Like I said, it should not be easy to put someone away. It shouldn't be this easy. It shouldn't be this easy for a jury to just look the other way. It breaks my heart what this family is going through. I feel like there were other suspects, like reading through the story, don't you guys feel like there were other suspects that were never looked at? And the fact that there were people partying in and out of that house all day, and he could have left that, like he's a grown man, he could have gotten up and left that house at any point in time during the night and run into somebody that he knew or had someone meet him that he knew and something went bad. There's just so many other possibilities, and to not have the corroborating scientific evidence. And 20 years ago, we still had DNA, we still had this evidence, we just didn't know how to use it as well as we do now. Which even now, we could be totally botching it because maybe in 10 years we'll find out something different. Who knows? But you can't always go by the latest and greatest technology because it could be wrong too. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I know this was a longer one, but I really wanted to do a deep dive on it. I thought this article was great. I'm not done. I'm not done. Hold on. Don't go anywhere. I didn't finish. I have to share with you guys. So we just read through up till 2019. So as we know, the case has been moving forward. I want to give you an update on where we are today. So, Ms. Raymond and family members have put this together, this Justice for Lewis Matthews website. You can log on here and search it, look in and find more information on his case and whatnot. Hopefully I'm sure they update it when new information comes in. But so here, I just wanted to share that with you. I will put in the links below in the descriptions, the link to the wrongful conviction of Lewis Matthews page. And also, there is a petition. I will give this to you guys as well, the link, so you can sign this petition. Lynn Ray, so Ms. Raymond, who we were talking about, or who was quoted in that story, posted this. So now this is current times. Louis' case is moving forward in 2024. After being wrongly accused and convicted for 20 years, the BC Innocence Project has spent the last several years investigating Louis' claims of innocence and has found adequate proof to support him. This is why there has been little movement on his accounts and his social media presence has been quieter than normal because, yeah, nothing's happening really. But his advocates have taken a breather while the professionals began the real work. They have now concluded their investigation. So now we can start to talk a little bit more about what they did here, what conclusions they came up with. So the Innocence Project has gathered more than enough new and old evidence to support a motion for a new trial under Rule 30. This will be presented to the Commonwealth in 2024, which is why we need your support today. I believe it's going to be heard later in the year. Is that? I don't know. I thought I read that somewhere that it's going to be heard later in the year. But for now, how you guys can help is to go sign this petition, share, get this word out, make sure people know about this. The best way to get rid of corruption is to shine a light on it. So the Innocence Project has gathered more than enough new and old evidence to support the new trial. Um, Louis' case is spearheaded by a great organization run by competent and seasoned attorneys who have enlisted the assistance of experts and investigators. Throughout his journey, the support of people like you has been everything to Louis. He has been so appreciative and thankful to you all. Without everyone's continued encouragement and advice, this would not have been possible. Thank you all for everything you have done. Louis sends his love and gratitude. He is beyond thankful to you all. Thank you sincerely. And I do recommend if you would like to, you can also write to Louis Matthews. So where was it? I can't remember. It's on this page here. Contact. It actually gives you a way to, you can register with their email that they use, that the prison uses, and you can email him and give him your support, show him your support, or you can send him actual written letter or package, something. I don't know what can prisoners accept anything? I don't know, other than mail. I have no idea. But you can write them a letter of encouragement, write them an email of encouragement. I recommend you do this. I think it's great for their just for their spirits to not be so low, to understand that they're not alone and there are people out here trying to help fight their fight for them, because inside you got to feel so helpless, and I can't even imagine what that feels like. Knowing you're innocent and knowing that the entire system is corrupt and against you. So I sorry. I just can't imagine that, and I hope that Louis knows that we're here and supporting him and his story's not going untold. With that, I am going to leave you guys, and please feel free to like this video, share, share, share. That's a great way to get this out there. And get the petition, and share the petition, and write them a letter. Let them know you care. All right, I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye now. If you've been impacted by a true crime and would like your story told in your own words, or if you or someone you know has been wrongfully convicted or accused of a crime, please write to crimeandcourtchannel@gmail.com and tell us your real true crime encounters. Thanks for watching.